Do not be afraid. These were the first words I spoke to the world as Pope, and they became the signature of my life. But what if I told you that the man who faced down dictators and inspired millions was not fearless? What if his secret was not about being strong, but about discovering a strength that comes only when we admit we are weak? This is the story the world rarely sees. This is the journey into the spiritual heart of a saint. We live in a world that tells us strength is about power, control, and never showing weakness. We believe that to be strong, we must rely only on ourselves. But what if that belief is the very thing that keeps us feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and alone? The life of Pope John Paul II dismantles this idea completely. Here was a man who survived Nazi occupation, an assassination attempt, and a crippling disease. Yet he was known not for his anger, but for his joy, not for his power, but for his peace. This creates a powerful tension, doesn't it? How can someone who endured so much suffering radiate such hope? That is the central question we will explore together. Where does that kind of strength come from? The answer is not what you might expect. It wasn't a personality trait. It was a practice, a set of daily hidden habits that anyone can learn. In this video, you will discover the simple prayer from his childhood that became his lifelong anchor. You will understand why he would lie prostrate on the cold chapel floor in the middle of the night. You will see how he transformed the bullet meant to kill him into a message of radical forgiveness. And you will learn how his most profound lesson was taught not in a grand speech, but in the way he faced his own dying. By the end of our journey, you will see these words, "Do not be afraid," in a completely new light. You will have a blueprint for a different kind of courage, a courage that is available to you in your own struggles, your own fears, your own daily life. This is more than a history lesson. This is an invitation to a more hopeful and resilient way of living. Stay with us until the end to discover the secret. And if this message speaks to you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the heart of what makes us truly human. Have you ever wondered where true strength comes from? Not the kind that moves muscles, but the kind that moves mountains of fear and despair. Let me tell you, it does not come from a title or a position of power. It is built in the silent, hidden hours before the world wakes up. For me, this was not just a habit. It was a law of spiritual physics, as real as gravity. My day began at 5 a.m. always. While Rome slept, I would rise. The first sensation was often the coolness of the floor beneath my feet, a small physical reminder that this was a transition from the comfort of sleep to the purpose of prayer. I would walk into my private chapel, a place that felt more like my true home than any palace. And there I would kneel. Often I would lower myself further, lying prostrate, flat on the cold marble floor, face down. Now you might ask, why such a hard and uncomfortable position? Why not a soft kneeler? Because comfort can make the soul sleepy. The gentle shock of the cold floor, the feeling of my body pressed against the hard surface, it woke me up. It was my body's way of saying to my soul, this is serious. This is real. This is where you lay everything down. In that profound silence, my first words were the same every single day of my adult life. They were not in Latin, the language of the church. They were in Polish, the language of my heart, a prayer my father taught me as a young boy after my mother had died. Come, Holy Spirit. This was not a complex prayer. It was an invitation It was a surrender. I would ask for the 7 gifts: wisdom to see as God sees, understanding to grasp the truth, knowledge to know the right path, counsel to make good choices, fortitude to be brave, piety to be a faithful son, and fear of the Lord to stand in awe of His majesty. This simple childhood prayer became the foundation for everything. It was the hidden source behind my encyclicals, my travels, my courage. I did not step out into my day trusting in my own intelligence or strength. I stepped out trusting that I had been given the gifts I needed for whatever I would face. Think about your own mornings. What is the first voice you hear? Is it the demanding ping of your phone, pulling you into a world of other people's problems and demands? Or is it the quiet, steady voice of your own soul, connecting with its Creator? That initial input sets the tone for everything that follows. If you fill your mind with anxiety first thing, you will spend the rest of the day trying to manage that anxiety. But if you fill your soul with light and purpose, you become a source of light for others. You cannot give what you do not have. That hour from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. was not a withdrawal from the world. It was where I gathered the spiritual resources I would need to give to the world. It was where I became a channel, an instrument. The courage to look into the eyes of dictators and say, "Do not be afraid," was born in those silent hours on the chapel floor. The strength to embrace the suffering of my later years was forged in that daily surrender. So I ask you, what could you become if you dedicated just the first 20 minutes of your day not to consuming the world's chaos, but to being filled with a peace that the world cannot give? Try it. Tomorrow, find your own version of that cold floor. Sit in the quiet and simply, humbly whisper, "Come." You will find that you are not alone, and that discovery changes everything. You know, we often speak to God with our minds and our voices, but have you ever considered that your body has its own language for prayer? From my youngest years, I felt God's presence not just in church, but in the wild beauty of creation. As a young man, I found my soul spoke to God most clearly when my body was active and alive. I would escape to the mountains with my students, hiking for hours through the Tatra forests. The rhythm of our steps, the burn in our legs, the shared silence. It was all a conversation with the Creator. We would kayak on serene lakes, my paddle dipping into the water in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Each stroke felt like a heartbeat of gratitude. This was not a distraction from prayer. It was prayer in its most physical form. I called this the theology of the body, a simple truth that your body is not just a shell for your soul. It is a partner. It is the means through which you act and love and serve in this world. When you hug someone who is hurting, your arms are praying. When you kneel in reverence, your entire posture is a prayer of surrender. And this truth became my anchor later in life, when my body began to fail me, as Parkinson's disease made my hands tremble and my voice grow weak. I had a choice. I could have hidden away, ashamed of this weakness, but I chose to let my body preach one last powerful sermon. Every shake of my hand, every struggle to walk, became an offering. I was showing the world that even when the body is broken, the spirit can remain unbroken, full of dignity and love. So I ask you, how is your body praying today? When you feel the fatigue of a long day, can you offer that tiredness as a prayer for your family? When you feel a pain, can you unite it with the sufferings of others in the world? Do not see your body as separate from your spiritual life. See it as your most faithful partner, your living, breathing instrument of grace. Let your whole life become a prayer. Have you ever felt that God is too great, too distant to approach? I want to share with you the secret that made God's love feel as close and comforting as a mother's embrace. For me, this secret had a name, Mary, and it had a motto, totus tuus, totally yours. These two words became the compass for my entire life. Now, you might wonder, why place such importance on Mary? Think of it this way. If you want to get close to a great king, the wisest thing you can do is befriend his mother. She knows his heart better than anyone. She can guide you to him with a love that is both tender and strong. My devotion to Mary was not about worshiping her. It was about trusting her to lead me perfectly to her son, Jesus. I prayed the rosary every day without fail. This was not a mindless repetition of words. It was a journey. With each decade, I would take Mary's hand and walk through the great joys, sorrows, and glories of Jesus' life. I saw her brave yes to the angel, and it gave me courage to say yes to God's difficult plans for me. I stood with her at the foot of the cross, and it gave me strength to endure my own suffering and pain. In fact, after I was shot in 1981, I insisted that the first copy of my surgery report be sent to the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that her hand had guided the bullet away from a fatal path. She had saved my life for a purpose. To say totus tuus is to let go of the need to control your own journey. It is to place your entire self, your hopes, your fears, your very will, into her hands, trusting that a mother's love will never lead you astray. Are you trying to navigate the difficult path of your life all on your own? What would it feel like to have a loving guide? What would it feel like to finally surrender and whisper, I am totally yours? This is not a surrender of weakness, my friends. It is the beginning of your greatest strength. There is a pain that goes deeper than any physical wound. It is the sting of betrayal, the shock of being wronged by another person. Can true forgiveness ever be possible in such a moment? I am here to tell you not only that it is possible, but that it is the only path to true freedom. I know this because I lived it. On May 13th, 1981, a man named Mehmet Ali Agca pointed a gun at me in St. Peter's Square and fired. The bullet tore through my body. The pain was a fire. And in that chaos, I felt my life slipping away. As I was rushed to the hospital, surrounded by fear and confusion, a profound struggle began inside me. It would have been so easy, so human, to let anger take root, to demand justice and punishment. But lying in that hospital bed, I remembered the words of Jesus. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I knew what I had to do. From my bed, surrounded by doctors and wires, I made a choice. I spoke these words to the world. I pray for the brother who shot me, whom I have sincerely forgiven. But forgiveness is not just words spoken from a safe distance. It must be made real. And so, on a quiet day in 1983, I went to Rabibia prison. I sat in a simple room, and I faced the man who tried to kill me. We spoke alone for a long time. I learned about his life, his confusion, his pain. I looked at him, and I did not see a monster. I saw a lost soul, a brother for whom Christ also died. That day, forgiveness became flesh. It was no longer an idea, but an action. It was the key that unlocked both of us from a different kind of prison, him from the guilt of his action, and me from the poison of hatred. Are you carrying the weight of an old hurt, Is there someone you have not been able to forgive? You think that by holding on to that pain, you are punishing them, but you are only building a prison for your own heart. Today, you have a choice. You may not be able to forget what happened. You may not even feel like forgiving, but you can decide. You can choose to set down that heavy burden and take the first step toward your own freedom. Will you take that step? We spend so much of our lives using words, but what if the most powerful messages we ever send are spoken in total silence? I traveled to over 129 countries, and I did not speak all those languages. But I knew a dialect that every human heart understands perfectly, the language of loving action. My words could explain faith, but my gestures had to embody it. They were my real sermons. Think of the simple act of getting off an airplane. I made it a habit to kneel down and kiss the ground of every new nation I visited. That was not for a photo. It was a silent prayer. It said, "Your land is holy, your people are precious. I come as a servant." That one gesture disarmed suspicion and built a bridge before I even spoke a word. Then there were the crowds. In a sea of thousands, it is easy to become a blur. But I would often stop everything. My security would grow nervous to approach one person. I remember a man in a square, his face terribly disfigured by illness. People turned away from him, but I walked directly to him, and I embraced him. I held his face in my hands. In that moment, my embrace shouted, "You are not your disease. You are a beloved child of God, and you are beautiful to me." The crowd fell silent, and they saw the gospel lived, and the children, oh, the children, I would halt my entire procession, a pope late for his own event, to kneel down and look a small boy in the eye, to listen to his simple question. That moment told every parent, this little one is more important than any schedule, any ceremony, any earthly power. My words reached people's minds, but these gestures, the kiss, the embrace, the pause, they bypassed the mind and went straight to the heart. They were the proof of the love I preached. So what is the unspoken message of your life? Is your rush telling people they are a burden? Is your distraction telling them they are unimportant? Or are your hands, your eyes, your posture, are they preaching a sermon of love, patience, and sacred attention? You do not need a vast stage to speak this universal language. You only need a heart that sees the dignity in every single person you meet. Start speaking it today. Have you ever been in prayer and felt nothing? You kneel down, you speak the words, but it's as if you're talking to a closed door. The warmth you once felt is gone, replaced by a hollow silence. You think, what is wrong with me? Has God left me? My dear friend, I want to tell you something crucial. This is not the end of your faith. This may, in fact, be its most important beginning. I knew this feeling well. There were periods in my life, even as Pope, when the chapel felt empty. The prayers that once filled me with light felt dry as dust. This experience is so common that the great Spanish mystic, St. John of the Cross, gave it a name. He called it the dark night of the soul. I studied him deeply, and he became a guide for me. He taught that God sometimes withdraws the feeling of His presence not to punish us, but to purify us. You see, if we only pray for the good feelings, the comfort, and the consolation, then we are loving the gift more than the giver. The dark night is where God asks us a profound question. Do you love me for myself, or only for the blessings I give you? This is where faith becomes real. It is easy to trust God when you feel His presence, but to trust Him in the silence, in the emptiness, that is faith that has been tested and strengthened like gold in fire. So what did I do in those times? I kept my promise. I went to the chapel at 5 a.m. even when it felt pointless. I said my prayers even with a heart that felt like stone. I showed up. That is the key. You do not need to feel it to believe it. You choose to believe it, and you remain faithful. Your dark night is not a sign of God's absence. It is an invitation to a deeper, purer, and more mature love. Will you accept that invitation? Will you trust the sun is still there, even when you are surrounded by clouds? What happens when a single spiritual truth meets the hard wall of political power? Can a prayer truly change the course of history? I am here to tell you that it can. It did. And it all revolved around 3 simple words I spoke on my first day as Pope. Be not afraid. But these words were not meant to stay inside the walls of the Vatican. They were a weapon meant to be carried into the darkest places on earth. In June of 1979, I went home to Poland. My homeland was trapped under the heavy boot of communist rule, a system that said God was dead, that the human spirit was just a cog in a machine, and that fear was the ultimate power. For 9 days, I traveled across the country, and millions of my countrymen came out to see me. They were not holding weapons. They were holding candles and rosaries and their children in their arms, and I stood before them and repeated those words, Be not afraid. I did not call for a political uprising. I called for a spiritual one. I spoke about the infinite dignity of every human person, created in the image of God, a truth that communism could not allow. I said, You are not who they say you are. You are not slaves. You are children of God. And as I spoke, you could feel the change in the air. A wall of fear began to crack. The people began to sing. They began to hope. And from that hope, a movement was born. Solidarność. Solidarity. It started in the shipyards of Gdansk with the electrician named Lech Walesa. It was a trade union, yes, but its soul was the spiritual courage we had awakened together. It was a revolution of the spirit. And 10 years later, in 1989, without a single shot being fired, the Berlin Wall, that monstrous symbol of division, came tumbling down. The communist regime in Poland collapsed. How did this happen? It was not my power. It was the power of the truth we proclaimed. It was the power of a people who finally stopped being afraid. So I ask you now, what are the walls in your life? They may not be made of concrete and barbed wire. They may be walls of anxiety, of addiction, of despair, of a broken relationship. The principle is the same. The world tells you to be afraid. It tells you that you are not strong enough, not good enough. But I am telling you now from the other side of history, be not afraid. Do not be afraid to hope. Do not be afraid to love. Do not be afraid to forgive. Do not be afraid to live the truth you know in your heart. Your personal revolution begins the moment you choose courage over fear. And that is a force no power on earth can ultimately defeat. The world teaches you a very simple equation. It says that happiness is the absence of pain. If you are healthy, wealthy, and comfortable, then you can be happy. But what happens when your body begins to fail you, when pain becomes your constant companion? This was the final great classroom of my life. In my later years, Parkinson's disease slowly took control of my body. It made my hands, which had once lifted a kayak paddle and held a pen to write encyclicals, tremble uncontrollably. It took my strong, clear voice, which had spoken to millions in stadiums, and reduced it to a whisper. It made my walk, which had been so vigorous, into a slow and painful shuffle. People looked at me, and they saw weakness. They saw a man in decline. They felt pity. But inside, I was experiencing one of the most profound truths of my life. I was discovering the astonishing difference between happiness and joy. You see, happiness depends on what happens to you. It is a reaction to good circumstances. But joy is something entirely different. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. It is a deep, unshakable river that flows from the certainty that you are loved by God, no matter what is happening to your body or your situation. My body became a prison, but my spirit was more free than ever. Why? Because I had learned to unite my suffering with the suffering of Christ on the cross. I did not see my shaking hands as a curse. I saw them as a continuing prayer. Every time I struggled to take a step, I offered that struggle for someone in the world who was also struggling. My pain had a purpose. It became a powerful offering. And this is why, even when I could barely speak, I insisted on appearing at my window for the Sunday blessing. The world saw a frail old man, but I hope they also saw something else. I hope they saw the light in my eyes that sickness could not dim. I hope they saw a smile that was not a mask, but the flag of a liberated soul. That was my final and perhaps my most powerful sermon. It was a silent testimony that shouted to the world, sickness will not win, despair will not win. In the end, there is joy. Are you searching for happiness in a perfect life? That is a search that will always leave you anxious, because perfect circumstances do not exist. But you can have joy right now, exactly where you are, in your pain, in your struggle, in your uncertainty. How? By doing what I did, by offering it up, by uniting it with a love greater than yourself. Your suffering, when given to God, is not wasted. It is transformed. It becomes the very thing that radiates a light so bright that the darkness of this world cannot overcome it. That light is joy, and it is yours for the choosing. Our world is afraid of death. It hides it away in sterile rooms. It speaks of it in hushed tones, as if it is a terrible failure, a final defeat. But I wanted to teach one last great lesson, and so I decided to die in public. In my final days, I did not retreat into seclusion. I let the world see it all. I let them see the slow, gradual diminishing. I let them see the frailty, the struggle for breath, the body becoming a shell. Why would I do such a thing? Because I wanted to show you that your death is not separate from your life. It is the final sacred step of your journey home to the God you have tried to love and serve. It is not a wall you hit, but a door you walk through. In those last weeks, when I could no longer speak, my silent presence at the window was my final homily. It was a sermon without words that thundered a simple truth. Even here, at the very end, God is with me. Do not be afraid. The world watched a man who was utterly powerless by human standards, and yet they saw a power that no earthly force could touch. The power of peace, of acceptance, of unwavering faith. And then, notice the divine poetry of the date. I died on the vigil of Divine Mercy Sunday. This was not a coincidence. It was the final seal on my life's work. I had dedicated my pontificate to proclaiming God's merciful love, and I was called home on the very feast I had given to the church. It was as if God was saying, everything you preached is true. Come now and receive the mercy you proclaimed. My final breath was not an end. It was a confirmation that love is indeed stronger than death, that hope is more powerful than despair, that the message of "do not be afraid" carries you all the way to the threshold of eternity, and then God Himself takes your hand. So I ask you now, how would you live today if you were no longer afraid to die? How would your priorities shift? How much more bravely would you love? How much more quickly would you forgive? This is the ultimate freedom I offer you, the freedom that comes from knowing, truly knowing, that you are held in a love that death itself cannot destroy. Live with that hope. Let it calm your anxieties and fuel your courage. And when your own final chapter comes, may you face it not with terror, but with the peaceful heart of a child, finally going home. And so, my dear friends, we have come to the end of our journey together. But really, this is where your own journey begins. Look at the path we have walked. We started in the quiet, hidden hours before dawn, where a man met God on a cold chapel floor. We saw how that same man climbed mountains and kayaked rivers, teaching us that our bodies too can pray. We learned the power of two simple words, totus tuus, a total surrender to a love that will never let us go. We witnessed the unbelievable act of forgiving a man who fired a bullet, and we saw how a simple kiss on the ground can speak louder than 1,000 speeches. We walked through the dark night, where God feels far away, and we discovered that this is not failure. It is faith being purified, like gold in a fire. We stood in crowded squares and felt the earthquake of hope that can literally bring down walls when people hear the words, "Be not afraid." We saw a frail, sick man whose trembling hands and silent suffering became his most powerful sermon of all, a sermon of joy that no sickness could destroy. And finally, we stood at the door of death itself, and we saw that it is not an end, but a going home. So what is the great secret woven through all these moments? It is this: your spiritual life is not a list of rules. It is a love story. It is a daily, moment-by-moment choice to turn your heart toward God. It is about finding the holy in the ordinary. In the first sip of your morning coffee, you can say, "Thank you." In the tiredness at the end of a long day, you can offer it up for someone you love. In the pain you did not choose, you can choose to trust. You do not need a papal palace to live this way. You only need a willing heart. The same Holy Spirit that filled a Polish pope with courage wants to fill you. The same motherly love that guided him is offered to you. The same strength that faced down an empire is available for you to face your next difficult day. This is the great truth. You are not alone. You are loved with a love that is stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger than death itself. So go now and build your life on this rock. Start small. Start today. Whisper your own, "Come, Holy Spirit." Make your work a prayer. Offer your worry. Choose to forgive one small hurt, and you will discover the world does not change around you. You change, and a changed you will change everything. Do not be afraid. God is with you always.